We live between two appearances, between two comings, if you will, between the two appearances of our Savior. Let's turn in our Bibles this morning to Hebrews chapter 9, the 9th chapter of the letter to the Hebrews. And let's read together the last two verses of that section, Hebrews 9, 27 and 28. In these two verses, we are reminded of that truth, that we are in this in-between, in the meantime, between His first and His last appearance. Hebrews chapter 9 says this in verse 27, "And just as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who eagerly wait, or who are eagerly waiting for Him." As we live between those two appearances, His first appearance for sacrificial work, His second appearance to deliver and rescue those who are prepared, those who are looking to Him, that means that we are, in a way, to live life in a backward way. Now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands on this one, but how many of you would like to say that you live a life that is backward living? And no, before we go any further, I'm not referring to something that is unsophisticated or anything like that when we say backwards living this morning. You could also think of it in the other way as living life, and I'm borrowing from a title of a book here, in fact, but living life backwards. Our tendency is to live life in a forward direction, in that we live life and we live today, and then we get up and we do it again tomorrow, and as one man said, the days turn into weeks, and of course the weeks to months, and then those years, and we just go through life in that forward way. But what if we could fast forward to the end? Not in some morbid way, but what if we could, in a sobering way, let's say, in a serious way, we could say, okay, here's the end. And you could think of that this morning as the end of life, as death. Even this passage says we have an appointment with death and judgment. Pick both and or those this morning, death or judgments, and then go back to now, and then, yes, you could think forward the rest of my life until that point. What if I learned to live life that way, to say, here's what I know is going to happen someday, sooner or later. How should I then live in that backward way? To clarify this morning, before we go any more into this, we do not mean living life in some way where we're fatalistic or we're obsessed about the end. We don't want to become people who are morbidly obsessed about death or things related to death. We're not talking about living life in some passive way or in some overly self-indulgent way. Some people might say, well, if I don't know what the future holds other than at some point, I'm going to die, then maybe I should just soak up all of the self-gratifying, fleshly things I can and sit around be as lazy as I can and just enjoy that while I can. That is not what we mean today. And we don't mean trying to live life where we're rewriting what has already happened. We don't mean backward living in that we look back at our life and try to relive it or rewrite the past. We do recognize that sometimes there is power in regret, in looking back and saying, I wish I'd done things differently, and allowing that to motivate us going forward, but even that can become overly problematic. Or perhaps we should say, if we overdo that, it becomes problematic. We don't mean living life full of regrets. That's not what we mean by backwards living this morning. So what do we mean? Let's put it in one statement, one simple observation. That as we look at the Word of God, as we look at what we know for certain, we just mean this morning living life now living today in view of what I know is certain about the future. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And living life just in a forward way might mean that I'm staking a lot on what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next year. I don't know any of that. There really is only those two things I know for certain about my future is death and judgment. How do I live life in view of that today? And this doesn't mean a joyless life. You could say it's a sobering life, or a sober life, but there's a kind of preciousness, a kind of joy, a kind of profoundness that comes even to the little things in life when I learn to live life. Fast forward, then back up and say, here's what I know is going to happen someday. How should I think and live toward that day? And thus, a backwards kind of living. To look at this a bit deeper this morning, let's consider these three angles of thought. First, the great equalizer and teacher. And then the side of accountability and clarity that also is coming someday. And if you want the cheat code already, okay, death is the great equalizer, but also teacher. And then more specifically, not just death itself, but judgment is where accountability, ultimate accountability before our Creator, but also clarity to things that have been not so clear. And then we'll close by looking at some changes in us. What happens when I learn to live life backward or backwards living? Let's consider a little closer this morning the great equalizer and teacher. I was reminded as I prepared for this morning of a story that actually is from some of my family, and I'm not going to give lots of details about that this morning, and it is different. But years ago, this happened. There was a man who was involved in a street gang, and his family was, of course, being aware of this. One member of the family decided, and I'm not recommending this if you want to help someone or cause a wake-up call. I'm not saying this is necessarily the best way to do this, but it's a reminder of how honesty and how soberness can come from something like a casket. But this person worked it out with the funeral home to bring their family member one day to the funeral home, and the funeral director began to ask them questions like, well, come in, and here's our casket room, and what would you like, and who do you want to do your service? They begin to ask them all these questions about their funeral. Now, of course, part of this is not just a wake-up call in general. It's about the mortality rate of those who are in a street gang. But the person began, of course, to look at their other family member and say, okay, what's going on? They kept saying their name repeatedly, and eventually they got upset and they ran out of the funeral home. But long story short, that was the beginning, the catalyst of a complete turnaround in life. And they became inactive in the gang. It's an example, at least, of what can happen when we are brought face to face with the reality, and you can make it poetic and say the reality of our mortality. There's something about that can cause us to rethink life. Now, we have a saying in our culture that says it's not about what? Not about the destination, it's about the journey. But how true is that? Is it really only about the journey? Or is it that there's something I learn, there's something valuable in looking forward and asking even the question, what is the destination? Now, perhaps for some, they would answer, and there's not really a destination. It's just you live life. And yeah, you're going to die someday, and that's it. But when the destination is a grave someday, funeral someday, what does that look like for how I live life now? There's another saying that I might like a little better that's live each day as your last. Why? Because someday you'll be right. Let's turn together to Ecclesiastes. We're going to be in Ecclesiastes a few times the rest of this time this morning. But Ecclesiastes 7. Now, this is a fun one to use when maybe you get laughed at. I don't know, I'd say laughed at, but people have wondered about me when I've said that I like sad movies, okay? And sometimes the happy, light movies are not my cup of tea. But Ecclesiastes 7, 1 through 5, points out these contrasts, these better than, and even goes so far as to say that it's better to go to you might think of it as a funeral setting, a sad mourning setting, than to a party. Ecclesiastes 7 says this, that a good name is better than precious ointment, and watch it, the day of death than the day of birth. And someone pointed out part of that is you even think of, yes, you're just as valuable as a human being made in the image of God from birth to death, but what can you say about a little baby? I mean, people say every baby's cute. I'm not sure that's true, but think of things that can be said at the end of life. And they might be good or bad, right? It might be this person, part of the reason maybe there's not a lot at their funerals, they didn't really impact people positively. Or maybe it is that you can say this person lived their life for the glory of God. This person obeyed the gospel and lived out the gospel. This person loved their family. This person cared about people. And life then is not about, it's not just about life. It's not just about when or how long you live. It's about living well so that you can die well too. It's about being prepared whenever that does happen, whether it happens in old age at 85 or it happens at 35 because of a tragic accident on the highway. It's not about when or even the actual specifics of death, but about being ready for whenever that happens. The next verse, verse 2 says, it is better then to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. That sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the songs of the fools. Notice that the end is not, the goal is not sorrow. There's a depth to your soul that is not joyless, or as we said earlier, not morbid, but a grounding that happens when you come face to face with the realities of life, with the tragedies of life, even, yes, the agonies, even the end of life. That there is something that we learn by these events, our own thinking about our own end of life, but also by considering the losses that we have, considering the people in our lives. That everybody is finite. Everybody is mortal. And so death becomes this teacher that looks at us and says, wake up. It's facing it, facing reality. As we said, we don't want to become people who have this morbid curiosity. We don't want to be people who avoid the topic, though, either. And isn't that what we do with death in our society? We tend to do one of a few things. We either just avoid it altogether. We don't want to bring it up. We don't want to think about it. We don't want to feel anything about that. We just want to live right now. And for some, at a certain point in life, you just have this built-in assumption that you're going to live forever. And I don't want to think about that. We ignore it. Or we laugh it off. Maybe we try to drink it away. Or maybe we do everything we can to put it off, in that we try to live as long as possible in some also obsessive way. There's a whole industry built around this, isn't there? I think they call it cinegenics. It's a whole medical industry on trying to help you live just as long as possible. I'm not saying you go the other way and you be reckless. But the Word of God, even here in Ecclesiastes, calls us to take a calm and serious look at what the future does hold, so that we come to death. And here's the thing, as a Christian, if I'm in the Messiah, then death is not my master. The Messiah came to deliver those who were in the bondage of the fear of death. That's Hebrews 2:14 and 15. He came and took on mortality and this human life so that he would die for us to free us from that. So as a Christian, mark it down today, death is not my ruler, my master. But there's still a place for coming to that as a pupil to be taught, and for just at least a few moments to sit at the feet, if you will, of death and say, what can I learn by fast forwarding and saying, this is coming? And death says, love. There's people in your life that you may not even realize yet how much you love them. Realize it now. Realize that you only have so much time to enjoy life, to make needed changes in life, to share with the people that you do love in life. Death can be a great teacher. Death is the great equalizer. The young, the rich, the poor, no exceptions, no exemptions. What can I learn by saying, that's where I'm headed. How do I want to live the life that I do have? Now here's the next step in that line of thinking. Have you ever had that dream where whatever it is, you're unprepared? Now, as a preacher, I've had that dream a few times, and it would be like this morning, and Shane says, here's the invitation song, and then please be seated, and it's time to get up and preach. And in the dream, at least, it's like somehow the Sunday evening of the previous week until now, you don't even know what happened, but you didn't even look over anything. There's no preparation, and it's time to get up and preach. And sometimes in the dream, you wing it. Sometimes you say, you get up and make some observations and excuses. Goes different ways. Now, thankfully, that's never happened in real life yet, okay? And that'd be a great time to preach a sermon on being unprepared, right? And I guess this morning I could have got up here and said, well, I didn't prepare. You don't be like that when it comes to life, right? But you've had that, likely. It's a human phenomenon because we want to be prepared for the big moments when we're needed to stand and deliver, sometimes literally. What if we do that with life, though? Now, I've yet to have this one, but what if you had that dream where you get to the end of life and you look back and think, well, I lived life and I did the things. I got up and went to work and but I never even really thought about preparing. Not just for the end of life, but for judgment, for the end of it all. And that's very end of Ecclesiastes, isn't it? Ecclesiastes 12, 13, and 14. What would it be like someday to stand before God in judgment and realize I'm unprepared for it? Ecclesiastes 12, verses 13 and 14, that close out the document. What might be part of it might be considered the most quoted part of the entirety of it. But he says this, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Or even this is all that man is. This is man's all. But then he says this. And you could look at it this morning as that is a summary of preparation. Living life for God. Living life not just for some higher purpose, but for the purpose for God and His glory. Following Him. But the reason he says in verse 14 is because God will bring every deed into judgment. With every secret thing, whether good or evil. So it is not merely, okay, I only have so much time. I'm only going to be in this life for however long, maybe a few decades, maybe 70, 80 years. Maybe I should think about what I'm doing with life. Life ends. The great equalizer and teacher, it's that after that, I'm going to be called in before my God. How have I lived in view of that? How would I want to give an answer? Will I come before Him washed in the blood of the Lamb so that I've been forgiven even of those evil deeds? How will I give an account of my life before God? My life that He's blessed me with to, yes, enjoy, but to one day answer the question, if you will, what did you do with that life that I gave you? Let's turn for a moment from Ecclesiastes to 2 Corinthians 5, verses 9 through 11. And as you read that, you might think about those two words, standing and looking. You could say this is a dream. You could say this is a theological imagination. But what if you could, living life backwards, what if you could go forward to that point and then look back, standing and looking back on your life? Do you think there'd be some things you might wish you'd done differently? Do you think there might be some things you wish had been more important to you? Maybe some things you wish you'd spent less time worrying about, or less money, or less time, less affection on? In 2 Corinthians 5, verse 9, in a context of looking to the future, looking to even the eternal dwelling, as he calls it in verse 1, he says, "So whether we are at home or away, we make it our aim to please Him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ." We live between two appearances, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. There is coming a day when God will settle His accounts. There is coming a day when all will be made clear. Those who have been faithful to the Lord, who may have gone through life being mocked by society, gone through life without the best and the biggest of things, when the reality of what that life meant will be known by all. And some of this is, yes, the accountability says, I need to be prepared for that myself. The clarity side says, I'm going to go through life, even as a child of God, with things that I don't understand, with things that confuse me, things that just outright confound me, things that will break my heart. And one day, the God of glory will right all wrongs. One day. And in view of that, I also have to come to grips with not just my responsibility, but with almost the opposite of that, in that I have to realize and even be willing to fully accept that I'm not in control. I can't be. It probably in reality wouldn't be good if I were, but regardless of all of that, I'm not. But I know someone who is. And even as I go through life, and I face the challenges, I face the sorrows, and sometimes it feels like I'm beaten and battered. But part of living life in this backward way is saying, that day's coming. And I'm not trying to picture it this morning. I know sometimes we think of all of our questions, even our oddities in Bible study will be answered that day. And I don't know how all that's going to work. You know, is it that every single question I ever had, God's going to stand there and give me the answers or flip a switch and I'll just know? That's not exactly even what we're saying this morning. It is that justice and righteousness will prevail. Now, thankfully, yes, those who are loyal in the Messiah, mercy and grace will also prevail. But all of that will be a part of the accountability, the clarity that God brings on that day. I stand today, I look to that day, and then I ask, how should I then live for that day? That brings us to the changes in us. Where we look at the great equalizer and the great teacher, we learn the lesson. We look forward to God's day, divine final judgment. And that changes us. But there's a difference. It's one thing to live life. It's one thing to live life well. You could quote William Wallace and say every man dies, but not every man truly lives. You could quote a more modern poet and say there's a difference between living and living well. You could say that life, in all of what we've seen and been reminded of this morning, that what I have in life should be treasured. Let's read one more passage together from Ecclesiastes 11. Let's back up to the end of the 11th chapter, and we're going to bridge over into chapter 12 as well this morning. Look at Ecclesiastes 11, verse 9. As you think about what happens to us, the way that we see things differently. This one says this in Ecclesiastes 11, verse 9, "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment." You're still keeping that in mind, even in this joy. And then he says in verse 10, "Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain or evil from your body. For youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth." And then this word "before" that he's going to use 3 times. It's here in verse 1, it's in the next verse, and then in verse 6. And the rest of this paragraph has this view in mind of you're looking forward and then back now. He says, "Remember your Creator before the evil days come and the years draw near in which you will say, I have no pleasure in them." This perspective on life and death and judgment, it changes how I see, for one, time. It's easy to go through life always focusing on the next thing. And I spend my life wishing away the life that I have, and I'm in high school when I graduate and go to college. Well, then I got to get out of college, and it's when I get married, or when we have kids, or when the kids leave home, or when I get this promotion, or when I can retire. It's always when I do this and that. And the wisdom here says before. Stop and consider life now. I guess this is where we could quote popular culture and say, it won't be like this for long. One of these days you're going to miss this. But there's something to life now that happens when I look at the big picture, and then, as we said earlier, when I live each day as if it were my last. It changes how I see time now. It changes how I obey God. It becomes more difficult to put things off, too. My submission to God is less procrastinated when I see time, when I see today as this is my day I've been given to live and enjoy. And so I enjoy life now more, but I make some decisions that are affected by the reality of life and its end. Time. But not just time, let's say value this morning. Now, you could easily attach that one to the other and say you value time differently. But here, I'm thinking more of the values in life. That things like bitterness and negativity become more difficult to sustain in life. It makes it more difficult to walk around with a sour attitude all the time because time is short and life is uncertain. This may be the best time in my life. Maybe I should wake up and enjoy that. Things like forgiveness and reconciliation with relationships that have gone crossways, things like that become more valuable to me. Stuff tends to become less important. I tend to lower my standards and realize that wealth and worldly success aren't what really matter, that they don't even compare to things like peace of mind and rest at heart. The relationships and people. My heart grows bigger, my hands grow a little looser, and I don't tend to hold on and clench things as much. I tend to want less of that and want more of things that are of far greater value in life. The simple times with God's people, with my earthly family, become that much more valuable. And here's one more this morning. Pain. When I look at life in this backward way, life is not just an ongoing series of good and bad. Even what I suffer in this life, I'm not trying to be one of those that makes everything that happens has this specific detailed purpose and meaning, but it is that when I look at the big picture, there is meaning in life and even in what I go through in life. It's in that same setting in 2 Corinthians 4 when we read that we can even make a comparison and say, I'm going to go through some bad things in this life, but it is by comparison momentary and light compared to what he calls the eternal weight of glory. But even how I see my pain and my suffering in this life is changed when I realize that there's this life I live, and then I will die and stand before God in judgment. And then I have the hope of life with God that is endless and it is pain-free and sorrow-free. Something changes in us when we learn to live life backwards. We've seen 3 this morning. We've been reminded of the great equalizer and teacher, death itself. And then a step beyond that, the accountability and the clarity of divine judgment. And then some things that may change in us, things that we will have a different perspective upon when we have this view of life. It's the power of living. Not just living in a way that we would say is good, but living a life for the Son of God. Isn't that what the Apostle Paul does as he's nearing what he knows to be the end of his life on this earth? Wouldn't it be great if I can say that with him? I have fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. I've been loyal to the end, my King. Henceforth, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord will award me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. You and I are living between his 2 appearances today. Living life backwards says, today, if I'm not, I'll put him on in immersion. If I'm not, I'll start life anew, living life with, for my Lord, so that I can say, that is what I have done, and that is what I will receive one day. With that in mind, let's stand and sing together.